Segment 1. Why it sucked to be a trader on the Silk Road Introduction. Imagine yourself in the year 1000 AD, standing on the edge of the mighty Taklamakan Desert, one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The sun above is a merciless orb, casting its relentless heat upon the endless stretch of sand that seems to go on forever. The road you travel on is rough, and the path constantly shifts with the changing winds. It's not a road of convenience. It's a test of endurance. The promise of richest silk from China, spices from India, and treasures from the far-off lands of Persia and beyond keeps you moving forward, but the journey is anything but easy. Every day is a struggle to survive. It's not just the desert that you must contend with. It's the other dangers that lurk in the shadows. In the morning, as the coolness of the night fades away, you gather your caravan, a mix of men, animals, and goods. You move in tight formation, always aware of your A camel's grumbling fills the air as the beast's heavy feet drag across the rocky terrain. Your pack animals, weary from the journey, follow with slow, deliberate steps. In the evenings, as the caravan settled near an oasis or a small settlement, the traders would gather around campfires, sharing stories of their travels, of the challenges they had faced, and the riches they hoped to acquire. The night, though cold and silent, offered a brief respite from the day's hardships. The firelight would flicker on the faces of the traders, casting long shadows as they ate simple meals and prepared for the journey ahead. But the threat of an attack hangs over the caravan like a dark cloud, and the exhaustion, the life of a trader on the Silk Road, was one of purpose. The promise of connecting cultures, of exchanging goods and ideas, was what kept the caravan moving. The trade route may have been treacherous, but it was also a lifeline for the empires it connected, a symbol of the human drive for connection, wealth, and exploration. You've been on the road for weeks now, and the thought of running into a band of raiders is never far from your mind. There's no luxury in this journey, only grit and resolve. Their sharp knives are always ready, their movements quick and lethal. But it's not just raiders that you fear. It's the very nature of the land itself. Each step forward, no matter how difficult, brought you closer to the next great city, the next opportunity to trade. These cities, like Samarkand and Bukhara, held the promise of meeting new people and cultures, of experiencing the wealth of the East, where spices, perfumes, and gems could be traded for silk, textiles, and ceramics. It was in these cities where the merchants could exchange news from distant lands, where the ancient worlds of the East and West came together. In the high mountains, the weather is a harsh mistress. The temperatures can plummet suddenly, and the high-altitude winds slice through you like icy knives. The snow can come without warning, trapping caravans for days. In the sweltering deserts, thirst is a constant enemy. The lack of water forces you to ration what little you have, making every sip feel like a blessing. You are part of a caravan, a group of traders braving the dangers of this ancient trade route known as the Silk Road. The Silk Road was not a single, unified empire. It was a collection of different kingdoms, each with its own customs, taxes, and laws. As a trader, you were constantly negotiating with local rulers, paying tolls to cross different territories, and hoping that you wouldn't fall victim to corruption. In some regions, the law was clear. If you were carrying goods from a rival empire, you risked losing everything. Every movement feels like an effort, your limbs heavy with exhaustion. The wind howls across the empty terrain, sending fine grains of sand into your face, scratching your skin. It's the sound of other traders, or perhaps, more frighteningly, the sound of bandits. Traders on the Silk Road were often at the mercy of these marauding groups who would ambush caravans to steal goods and horses. The violent raids were a common threat to anyone traveling the route. There was no guarantee that you would make it to the next city with your life, let alone your goods. You pull your scarf tighter around your head, trying to shield your eyes from the stinging particles. There is no shade here, no respite from the sun. You look ahead, and the landscape is nothing but a vast, unyielding stretch of sand, interrupted only by distant hills that might just be a mirage. The weight of your pack, filled with precious silk and spices, is a constant burden on your back. You wipe the sweat from your brow as the dry wind sweeps across the barren landscape, carrying with it the faint scent of burning sand. For centuries, this desert has been a deadly crossing where survival is not guaranteed. In the heat of midday, the glare from the sun on the sand seems almost blinding. As a trader, this is your daily reality. You begin to hear the rhythmic sound of hooves in the distance, growing louder and louder until a small cloud of dust rises on the horizon. The lawlessness of the route meant that traders had to be constantly vigilant. Bandits, with their rough clothes and hardened faces, have been known to kill traders in their sleep. And if nature wasn't enough of a challenge, there were the political barriers. But amid all these difficulties, there was a certain rhythm to life on the Silk Road. Though the hardships were immense, there was also a sense of camaraderie among traders. In those quiet moments, there was a realization that despite the constant struggle, despite the dangers. Segment 2. The Journey of Xuanzang, Pilgrim and Scholar Introduction. Now, as we leave behind the grit and dust of the trader's journey, let us turn to one of the most extraordinary figures to travel the Silk Road, the Chinese monk and scholar Xuanzang. Imagine yourself as Xuanzang, preparing to embark on a journey that would stretch over thousands of miles. A journey not only through physical terrain, but also through the very fabric of belief and knowledge. His quest would take him from the serene temples of China to the fabled lands of India, where he sought to retrieve the sacred texts of Buddhism. His journey was fraught with challenges, but he was driven by an unwavering dedication to find the true teachings of the Buddha, which had been distorted in China. What he sought were the original Sanskrit scriptures, untouched and unaltered by time or translation. As he traveled, Xuanzang's mind wandered as much as his feet, contemplating the deeper meanings of life. The camels that carried his belongings trudged on, their slow, rhythmic steps matching his own. It was a hard existence, but Xuanzang's resolve was unwavering. The weight of the scriptures he sought seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile, but it was not the physical burden that threatened to overwhelm him, it was the mental strain. The landscape was barren, the silence deafening, and the isolation was profound. But within this silence, Xuanzang found peace, a connection to something greater than himself. He imagined the teachings of the Buddha, the wisdom of the sutras, and the light they promised. The monasteries that dotted the landscape were rich with manuscripts and teachers who welcomed him with open arms, recognizing his earnestness and determination. The sound of his sandals scraping against the gravel was a reminder of his solitude. As the vast emptiness of the desert swallowed every other noise, here he was greeted with reverence by the local monks who recognized his dedication and scholarly pursuit. For the first time since he had left China, Xuanzang felt a deep sense of peace. Knowing that his long journey was nearing its end, he knew that for months he would be exposed to the harshest conditions, intense heat during the day and biting cold at night. Yet, he pressed on. But it was not only the religious sights that captivated him, was the sense of profound wisdom and serenity that pervaded the Indian landscape. The beauty of India, with its lush landscapes, quiet rivers, and temples adorned with intricate carvings, contrasted sharply with the barren deserts and rugged mountains he had crossed. But the contrast was not only geographic, it was spiritual. Xuanzang had journeyed far, not only across lands, but into the depths of his own soul. In the monasteries of Nalanda, the great university of ancient India, Xuanzang encountered some of the greatest scholars of his time. These monks not only preserved the sacred texts, but also engaged in deep philosophical discussions about the nature of existence and the path to enlightenment. Here, the merchant caravans that traversed the region carried goods from the east to the west, from China to the Byzantine Empire. Yet, despite the intellectual riches that Central Asia offered, Xuanzang was still focused on his ultimate goal: reaching India, the birthplace of Buddhism, to find the original texts that had been lost to time. India, with its temples, shrines, and monasteries, would be the final destination of his long and arduous pilgrimage. The fragrance of spices and incense filled the air, and the sound of foreign tongues mingled in the marketplaces. It was in these cities that Xuanzang encountered the richness of the Silk Road's cultural exchange. He marveled at the blending of Persian, Indian, and Central Asian influence, Sich culture, bringing with it its own traditions, philosophies, and artistic expressions. In the distance, he could hear the low hum of scholars in deep conversation, their words a reflection of the intellectual and spiritual ferment that was present in these vibrant centers. These were places where different cultures, languages, and religions converged. Xuanzang was not only seeking sacred texts, but was also eager to learn from the scholars and monks who resided in these cosmopolitan centers. It is the year 629, and the air is thick with anticipation. Xuanzang, dressed in humble robes, carries with him a purpose more profound than the trade of goods or wealth. He seeks enlightenment, not for himself alone, but for the people of his homeland. Behind him, China's ancient capital of Chang'an fades into the distance, its bustling streets and grand buildings shrinking as the vast, open expanse of the Gobi Desert looms ahead. For Xuanzang, the Silk Road was not merely a trade route. It was a path to knowledge, a spiritual pilgrimage that would take him to the heart of Buddhism. The desolation of the Gobi Desert stretched out before him like an ocean of sand. Its heat oppressive and the silence almost unbearable. In the distance, a few small oasis settlements began to appear, mere specks on the horizon, offering brief moments of respite. Crossing into Central Asia, the route eventually led him out of the desert and into the bustling oases and cities of Central Asia, which lay at the crossroads of the Silk Road. His time in Central Asia was transformative. He met other pilgrims and scholars who had made their own journeys, and together they exchanged knowledge and ideas. The crossroads of cultures as Xuanzang journeyed westward. He passed through cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, whose wealth and grandeur were unmatched. Through these interactions, Xuanzang deepened his understanding of Buddhism, especially the more esoteric and philosophical teachings that he had only heard about in China. Arrival in India after 3 long years, Xuanzang finally arrived in India, the land where the Buddha had once walked. In the land of his spiritual ancestors, Xuanzang visited the holy sites, including the place where the Buddha had attained enlightenment. Xuanzang spent several years in India, learning from the best minds of the time and collecting the original Sanskrit texts he had come to find. Segment 3: Desert Cities and Forgotten Temples along the route introduction, as we drift further along the ancient Silk Road. Our path leads us through the forgotten and mysterious places that once thrived along the route. These desert cities, now swallowed by time and sand, were once bustling hubs of trade, culture, and spirituality. Picture yourself standing in one of these ghostly cities, where the wind whispers through the ruins, carrying with it the faint echoes of the past. The walls that once stood tall and proud are now crumbling, their surfaces smooth with the erosion of centuries. Yet their stories still linger in the air like ancient incense. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, claimed many of these once great cities. But in their time, they were vital stops along the Silk Road. Here, in the caves of Mogal, a series of rock-cut temples that stretch along the cliffs. Buddhist monks painstakingly created a legacy of art and learning that survives to this day. The colors of the murals have faded over time, but their beauty remains undeniable. The Buddha, painted in serene tones, watches over you, his gaze eternal, as the flickering candlelight casts shadows on the walls. Lulan's location, deep in the heart of the Taklamakan Desert, made it an important stop for merchants and travelers who needed to rest, resupply, and exchange goods. However, Lulan's fate was sealed when the water sources dried up, and the city was slowly abandoned. Yet, even as the sand devoured it, the memory of Lulan lived on in the stories of those who passed through it. The merchants and travelers who stopped there carried with them tales of a city that once stood as a symbol of prosperity and exchange. A city where cultures mingled and goods from east and west were traded in abundance. Known for its lush surroundings and rich resources, Khotan was a thriving center of Buddhist culture and trade. The city's temples, adorned with intricate carvings and statues, once housed some of the most revered relics of the Buddha's teachings. The art and architecture that flourished here, blending elements of Indian, Central Asian, and Chinese styles, still inspire scholars and artists alike. The ruins of Khotan are not simply abandoned stones. They are a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder of the power of cultural exchange that defined the Silk Road. Now, these temples are little more than ruins, but their historical significance cannot be overstated. Today, it lies buried beneath layers of sand, a silent testament to the fragility of civilization in such a harsh environment. And scholars would gather to study the Buddhist texts that Zhuangzang himself sought during his pilgrimage. The air here would have been filled with the sound of chants, the rhythmic hum of Buddhist prayers, and the occasional flutter of paper as scrolls were unrolled to reveal sacred scriptures. It is in these temples that the ideas of Buddhism were preserved, transmitted, and expanded upon, shaping the religious landscape of Asia for centuries to come. The air inside the caves is cool, a stark contrast to the blistering heat outside. The ruins are faint, almost imperceptible, but as you move closer, What little remains of Lulen is a reminder of how quickly a city can be swallowed by the desert, forgotten by time, and lost to history. But the people who lived here were not entirely forgotten. Their presence is still felt through the artifacts that have been unearthed by archaeologists' fragments of pottery, textiles, and coinage, telling the story of a civilization that once flourished along this great trade route. These caves were not just places of worship. They were a testament to the enduring spirit of those who traveled the Silk Road in search of knowledge and enlightenment. The temples, with their intricate murals and statues, offer a glimpse into the devotion and creativity that flourished in this remote part of the world. It was here that goods were exchanged, knowledge was shared, and cultures collided. And while the ruins may be silent now, their presence is far from forgotten. You can almost feel the pulse of life that once flowed through these arid landscapes long before the sands began to reclaim them. The ruins of Dunhuang, among the most famous of these forgotten places, is Dunhuang, a city located at the edge of the Gobi Desert. Dunhuang was once a thriving oasis town and a key stop for traders and pilgrims making their way along the Silk Road. Imagine yourself walking through the now deserted streets, the soft crunch of sand beneath your sandals, the only sound, the distant hum of the wind. You can still see the remnants of the city's once thriving marketplace, where traders from all corners of the ancient world would have peddled their ware silk from China, precious stones from India, spices from the Arabian Peninsula. But Dunhuang was more than just a stop for trade. It was a spiritual hub. As you walk through the caves, you can almost feel the presence of the artists and monks who worked here. The lost city of Lulan, another forgotten city that lies beneath the desert sands, is Lulan. Once a prosperous trading center along the southern branch of the Silk Road. Imagine standing on the outskirts of what was once Lulan, the vast expanse of sand stretching out in all directions. The desert's grip on Lulan was relentless, and over time, the city vanished. The temples of Khotan, further to the southwest. Near the modern-day border of China and Pakistan lies the ancient city of Khotan. The temples of Khotan were not only places of worship, they were also centers of learning, where monks today. Khotan is a city of ruins, but its influence extends far beyond its walls. Segment 4. The Merchant Princess. Wealth, Language, and Influence. Introduction. As we near the final leg of our journey along the Silk Road, we turn our focus to the powerful merchant princes who control the flow of goods and ideas across the ancient trade routes. Picture yourself walking through the grand halls of their lavish homes, where the air is thick with the scents of incense and spices. These men sometimes seem as little more than traders wielded incredible power, using their vast wealth and influence to shape the world around them. These merchant princes were not merely middlemen, they were diplomats, bankers. Many of these individuals were not born into nobility. Instead, they had risen through the ranks of the merchant class, amassing fortunes from the trade of silk, spices, precious metals, and other luxury items. With each successful journey along the Silk Road, their influence grew, and they began to establish powerful dynasties that spanned continents, and patrons of the arts, playing a crucial role in the cultural exchange between the East and the West to protect their fortunes. These merchant princes often engaged in complex alliances, both with local rulers and fellow traders. They built relationships with those in power, offering tribute in exchange for favorable trade terms or protection along the dangerous routes. As you stroll through their palatial estates, you can almost hear the clink of gold coins and the chatter of negotiators, discussing trade agreements that would determine the flow of luxury goods from China to the Roman Empire and beyond. A well-placed word or phrase could make the difference between a lucrative trade deal and a failed one. The language of diplomacy and trade, in many ways, was the foundation of their power. Many of the most celebrated cultural exchanges along the Silk Road were due to the generosity of these wealthy merchants. Buddhist monks and scholars, supported by wealthy merchants, could be found in the great cities of Central Asia, studying ancient texts and creating new interpretations of the Buddha's teachings. At the same time, the merchants brought back the art, literature, and technology of other cultures, introducing new ideas to the societies they visited. As they amassed riches, they commissioned artists to create exquisite works, funded the construction of schools and libraries, and sponsored the translation of texts from one language to another. A Persian poet might sit alongside a Chinese calligrapher, while a Greek philosopher converses with an Indian mathematician. Their wealth and influence left an indelible mark on the civilizations of the East and West. The goods they traded, the ideas they exchanged, and the wealth they accumulated shaped the world in ways that are still felt today. These gatherings were not only intellectually stimulating, but also a reflection of the blending of cultures that define the Silk Road, but also the very nature of human connection. From the dusty deserts to the bustling cities, from the humble traders to the powerful merchant princes, the Silk Road was a place of profound exchange, a place where goods, ideas, and cultures flowed freely, transforming the world in ways that continue to resonate in the present day. But without them, the Silk Road would not have thrived. Imagine the rhythm of life on the Silk Road, the steady hum of caravans, the quiet murmur of traders negotiating deals, and the far-reaching influence of those who walked its vast expanse. In the stillness of the night, Let the memories of these ancient exchanges soothe you, as they have soothed countless generations before us. They were the lifeblood of the trade network, the silent architects of the cultural exchanges that took place along the route. They connected the world in ways that no single empire or ruler could have done on their own. Along the Silk Road, language was more than just a means of communication. It was a way to bridge cultures and open doors to new opportunities. Many converted to Buddhism, Islam, or even Christianity, using their wealth to build temples, mosques, and churches along the route. They understood that religion, like trade, had the power to unify and connect distant cultures. The wealth they generated from trade not only enriched their own lives, but also helped to spread the spiritual and intellectual currents of the Silk Road far beyond the borders of their home regions. The merchants of the Silk Road were often polyglots, fluent in multiple languages, including Persian, Arabic, Chinese, and sometimes even Greek or Latin. The rise of merchant wealth, negotiating with a Chinese silk merchant in the East, or a Roman official in the West. The ability to speak the language of your counterpart was invaluable. It was not only a practical skill, but a sign of respect, and it opened doors to new trade agreements, partnerships, and alliances. The wealth accumulated by the merchant princes of the Silk Road was staggering. These merchants knew that wealth wasn't just about the goods they traded, it was about control of the caravan routes, control of the markets, and most importantly, control of information. And artisans all working together to maintain the flow of goods and information. The luxurious carpets beneath your feet, the fine silks draped over the walls, and the gleam of precious jewels in the light hall. These symbols of wealth are a reflection of the merchant's success. A merchant prince could dictate terms to kings and emperors, determining which products would be exchanged and at what price. Their ability to negotiate their networks of contacts across the Silk Road made them some of the most powerful individuals in the ancient world. Imagine the life of one such merchant prince. In a city like Samarkand or Bukhara, the heart of the Silk Road, you would find yourself surrounded by advisors, traders, but wealth also brought its own challenges. Rivalries between merchant families were common, as competition for control of the Silk Road intensified. Language as a tool of power, one of the most significant tools of influence wielded by these merchant princes was language. These merchants understood that language was key to establishing trust and rapport with people from different cultures. For the merchant princes, mastering the art of language meant more than just learning words, meant understanding the cultural nuances, the customs, and the etiquette of different societies. Cultural exchange and patronage, the wealth of the merchant princes was not only spent on luxuries, but also on the patronage of the arts, science, and religion. It was in this cultural melting pot that ideas and philosophies from the East and West collided, giving rise to new schools of thought. In the palaces of the merchant princes, you might have witnessed scholars and artists from distant lands exchanging knowledge and ideas. The merchants themselves were often patrons of religion. The legacy of the merchant princes as we conclude our journey along the Silk Road. We look back at the legacy of these merchant princes. Yet, despite their immense power, the merchant princes were often forgotten by history, overshadowed by the great empires and rulers they served. Closing reflection as we close this chapter of our journey. It's worth reflecting on how the Silk Road shaped not just the course of history as you drift into sleep,